So Simone Roy, who is back, we haven't seen her yet, but she's back from her time in France. And she posted a picture of her potato harvest on her return. And it was bountiful. In fact, she thinks it may have been the best one ever. And she thinks that perhaps it might have something to do with the fact she hadn't been poking at it for months and months, going like, well, what about now? But it struck a chord for me, for I'd recently been thinking about where we all came from religiously and what rich harvest we might have from those traditions. Many of us here, although not all, are immigrants to UUism. We came here looking for something different than what we'd known. Some of us left where we were on the run. Some chose to leave for positive reasons, and some of us wandered away in search of something different, perhaps something more. If you ask, many of us are easily able to articulate what went wrong, where we were, and why we moved on. And it's good to have a handle on that. But we can rehearse those reasons too easily and forget to spend time counting up the blessings, digging back into that field, and really looking at what that harvest was for us, and perhaps continues to be. Some of the fruits and vegetables in those gardens may not be what we would choose now. So let's leave them for others to glean. However, some may be. There are those that nurtured us well as we were growing up and for which we retain a decided partiality. It is true, there are foundational tenets from my childhood religion in which I am simply disinterested. Some of the central stories of Christianity have no meaning for me any longer. The story of the resurrection is not a story that matters to me. It's not a question of believing or disbelieving. It simply isn't something I think about or believe I need to think about. My Jesus stories are about his justice making, and my foundational stories about Christianity are about the people I know who taught me to be the best person I could by being the best people they could be. People who taught me not only to be a good person, but also to be good at what I did. People who taught me and my cohort to be open and welcoming, long before those two things were words we needed to build movements on. It was a sad surprise, and essentially what helped me to leave my church, when some began to find limits in the openness and inclusivity that they'd taught me, was boundless. So that's when I started wandering. I know I've said this before, but when they taught me to sing Jesus Loves the Little Children, I believed them. I couldn't understand how they thought that the God who was all-loving, the God to whom they introduced me, could be a God of conditional love. So when people were held up as a minority that they thought, or that at least a minority of them thought that Jesus wouldn't love, that's when I knew I had to leave. It was sad. And yet I embarked on a long and interesting journey on which I learned a lot and had a fair amount of fun along the way. I know how lucky I was. Much of my realization about the limits was intellectual. I wasn't in danger. I wasn't hated for who I was. And indeed, my mentors were willing to let me talk to them about my inability to live within their established boundaries. They didn't stop loving me, even when they found me misguided. They recognized my search as a search. And despite people's holding some fairly conservative Christian views, I never had anyone I loved threaten my afterlife or predict a bad end in this life. And now, these many years later, I realize that however we name it, my belief in an inexhaustible love remains unshaken. Some call it evolution, others call it God. When I turned away from Christian practice, I didn't turn away from love, and it didn't turn away from me. And now, these many years later, I realize that however we name it, my belief in an inexhaustible love, I just said that. The other day, I started using paper again, and I want to actually suggest this to some of the people who preach, is that there are people here who can no longer hear us. And I will always have at least a second copy of my sermon with me, so that if someone needs a copy of a sermon, please let me know. So the other day, my ancient Christian beliefs and my universalism collided in a way I certainly didn't expect, and in a place I was quite surprised by. I was at the dentist. And when she finished, luckily my mouth wasn't open while we had this conversation, she made other than to talk, right? She made a comment that made me realize that her young husband had died, and I had not known that. So we talked. And she explained that she was coping with his death by embracing Jesus. She explained to me what she was reading, and then she started to cry. She felt that she had failed her husband as a wife because she had never brought him to Jesus. What if, she said, what if he's in hell right now, separated from the love of God simply because I didn't know better? I pushed aside, I give myself some credit for this, I pushed aside the part of me that goes crazy at this predatory behavior of a certain style of Christianity, because she has been and is being tormented enough. I was surprised to find a comforting but firm voice emerging into the balance, a voice that comes from 4 places: my experience with standing at the deathbeds of far too many people, my Christian upbringing, my pagan practice, and a firm grasp on the universalist notions about an afterlife. A voice that was rock-sure and steady, a voice that surprised me to hear coming out of me. It was an octave deeper than my voice already is, and it was wrapped around some boulder down in the middle of the earth. I felt like a Hebrew Scripture prophet. Fear not. Right? I don't often worry about an afterlife, although I do look for comfort for the bereaved. I do believe that Blood, Sweat, and Tears had it exactly wrong when they sang, "I swear there ain't no heaven and I pray there ain't no hell." I do not believe that love everlasting allows for hell, although sometimes humans do what we can to create it on earth for many. And I believe that there is forgiveness, both small and large F. My friend Joanne says, "Oh, I know I'm going to be sitting at the welcome table and Hitler will be there and I'm going to have to deal." My metaphor is I'll be on the go to heaven bus and my seatmate will be, and that name has changed several times. But I believe if there is a heaven, we will all be welcomed home again. And heaven knows, perhaps, I would love to see my family again. I miss them, particularly on holidays. But as I said, mostly I don't think about it. I focus on what is here. But when I watch someone being tormented, I have assurance. You know, the song, "Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine," there is a piece of that Jesus that is still mine. And I can say to that poor woman that her husband is safe and in the breath, in the heart of God. That to say otherwise is to deny the Jesus that she is coming to love. I can say that she needs to start her Jesus reading not on the apocalyptic horrors at the end of the Christian scriptures, but to read the Gospels again and again until she understands how Jesus is rooted in love and community. I can say these things with absolute faith, and I did. I can say it so firmly that she could hear and believe, because she loves her husband, because she trusts me and my faith. Now was not the time to do anything but reassure her and to help her remember what a sweet man her husband was and what tender care he shared with her and her son, and to give her some places to start in her exploration of Christianity that are not apocalyptical. It's stunning to me. It's always stunning to me that there are so many who come through that process with only that information. It was startling to realize how much of that faith in love I brought with me to this, my new faith. I have always known that my sense of justice developed in that crucible. I believe I'm a better person since I've become a UU, but I believe I'm a better UU because I had this earlier experience. My potato field was full of sustenance for the journey. I suspect that's true for all of us. I wonder what true and reliable thing you may still carry with you from your past. I think it's good to review our lives and look for the positives and the successes, and not simply our flaws and failures. When we think about the list that you all worked on with Sarah of the things in which you're interested, my guess is that the things you spoke for might just be extensions of the things you learned in that place you came from. Maybe not. Maybe you learned these things because where you were didn't offer enlightenment. But I think it's possible. Often our most fundamental beliefs have their seeds in the past. Some of our seeds required transplants, it's true. But often we've just needed a bigger pot. Can you believe all the garden metaphors I'm using? I mean, really? Okay, I want some credit here. I believe this is as true for our cradle UUs as it is for our immigrants, as I call us. Life changes, and so does our faith. In fact, we're committed to figuring out how the changes change us by our affirmation of the third principle. You can look at the words in your bulletin. Today's culture is different than it was for us growing up, however old or young we may be, and UUism has had to grapple with its stance on culture and our religious understandings of our world. That causes all of us to look again. And, to think again about the Hebrew definition of sin is to miss the mark and to return, to turn one more time is what repent is. And I think that's it's a foundational word, and it's something in our culture, and I know we've talked about this, I have, and other people, that we're afraid to say we were wrong, and so it's impossible to say I'm sorry, and it's impossible to learn anything if you can't admit you were wrong. And that's a cultural thing right now. But there's always more to know and more to integrate. When Sarah asked what I wanted for a UU moment this week, I asked for the 6 sources. I did that because I want us to remember where we came from. I did that because I want us to remember what sent us on our journey, inside or outside this faith. I did that because I think we polish our best selves with the help of different traditions, different wisdom, different celebrations. And I think we need more celebration. We need it particularly in these grim times. It is so easy to only take life seriously, to be anguished about it. But if we only have, as Mary Oliver says, one precious life, some of it had better be spent having a good time and celebrating. Because life is fascinating. Sadly, UUism doesn't have a lot of celebrations of its own. So when we're lucky when our members bring their traditions with them and invite us into their wonder. This weekend was Thanksgiving, in case anybody missed that. And on a Facebook post, I was chastised for celebrating a holiday that was based on a massacre. I have a lot of anarchists on my post now, thanks to Poor People's Campaign. And I'm not sure when the connections between the myth of the settlers' embrace of their native hosts and Thanksgiving was made. In fact, George Washington had the first day of Thanksgiving, and he called for a great Thanksgiving. I think it took a while for the same merchandisers who brought us the Christmas holidays to show up with those cute little candles that we grew up with of pilgrims and of Indians and that story. There's no question that white Americans are responsible for the genocide, both accidental and purposeful, of Native Americans, and for erasing their cultures, and for the Disneyization of that myth. But Thanksgiving has also grown beyond the commemoration of that myth. We need to separate from that myth entirely. We need to work for Native rights and for justice. When we explore their reverence for the earth and the peoples, there are many things that they got right. And white culture has done them, continues to do them, serious disservice. But Thanksgiving is also a harvest celebration and a treasured celebration of family and friends, complete with festal foods. It's true in most of America, they're mostly beige and white, and therefore not all that good for you, but yummy. Little butter, we're all happy. But that's the thing about festal foods. They're not everyday foods. They're particular to festivals. So celebrations demand special foods. Our world is so afraid of that kind of flat-out celebration. I was at the grocery store the other day in the candy aisle. I'm not there very often, so I'm always amazed at the variety, and it takes me a while to get out of it. It's like, and do you know they don't have dark chocolate M&Ms? What a waste. But there was something I was doing, so I wanted some chocolate. And I was trying to make my decision about what the right chocolate was to get. A woman I know, although not well, came by and shook her finger at me and said, "You don't need any of that." Well, but really, how does she know that chocolate isn't exactly what I needed? And chocolate, I mean, what is sweeter than chocolate shared with friends, if you can, you know? I mean, I knew this guy in the Bay Area, and somebody had just graduated from something, and a bunch of us were getting together and going out and going to a place that has fabulous chocolate cake. And he was like, well, you know, guys don't ever do that. And I'm like, well, deciding I wasn't going to take responsibility, I said, well, why not? And he said, well, I guess we're not like that. I'm like, do you like chocolate cake? He goes, yeah. I said, do you have friends? He goes, yeah. Do they like chocolate cake? He goes, I think so. I'm like, you could do this, I think. This is not, this isn't nuclear engineering. This is just going out for chocolate cake. Again, not every day. But when did a mouthful of sweetness become a problem, even the problem in this world? I mean, that was one of the wonderful things about the Diwali celebration we had, is like, we begin the new year with a mouthful of sweetness. I don't know about you, but I know that I need these interruptions in the struggle for justice. As I said, life can't just be endless rounds of struggle. One of the things that's hard about my job is that at least weekly I encounter problems where all I have to offer is a listening ear. When you don't have heat or health insurance or a reliable vehicle, I'm sorry, however heartfelt, doesn't mend things. And for someone who wants to change things, to set things right, this is hard. I believe in presence, and I believe it's helpful, but the desire for larger impact is there. In this discomfort, mine and theirs, we need commemoration. We need the hope. We need the companionship. Joy shouldn't be just intermittent, but also deliberate. Coffee hour is the smallest part of this. So you might want to sign up to make coffee. We have Chris, newly in charge. She'll make an announcement afterwards. Our great cookie capers, and now we have 2 of them every year, are there to leave us with a mouthful of sweetness. Our yard sale food is part of that. Our potlucks are also a part. There was a lot of pot licking going on this, I admit it. But I still long for festal foods or a festal food, foods that are particular to our group for some holiday, however insignificant. You know, I decided yesterday, I didn't get to it last night, but that I need to look up when World Peace Day is and invite Barbara to make peace cookies for us, which are wild and outrageous, and they were so called because they're so rich in chocolate that they can change the world. But I believe, and I always have, that we must reach back to our past or build into our future. And we should have food for the journey, not just sustenance, but also celebration. When I think about this, I think about how much I miss Jean Weston. And for those who don't know her, she's the quilter, but she's the woman who always said, hospitality is my ministry. And if I had been thinking about this when she were alive, we would have several holidays and they would have prescribed menus. Right? There would have been nourishing food and there would have been chocolate. There would have been good company and some sweet respite from the world around us. It's an important part. It's not all we do here, but it's an important part. There is challenging work ahead of us, but we are together. And we have resources, individually and communally. Let's celebrate that, shall we? And let us give thanks for this gathering, lingering here for just a bit so that when we return to our lives, we do so stronger, refreshed, remembering where we came from and how we came to be here. Blessed be.